Welcome to the Firestarters video series. My name is Steve Scheier. I create leadership power grids. I talk and write about power, and I work with leaders in cannabis to help them tap into their power and, most importantly, to empower others. Our guest today is Lisa McClung. Lisa's last position in cannabis was the CEO, president, and board member of Coda. She is a leader, innovator, and disruptor, and I'm very pleased to welcome her to the show. Lisa, thank you for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate being included. I know the caliber of people that you assembled for the book and really loved what came out of it. I'm just really complimented to be involved in anything you work on. So thanks for having me.
Oh, well, it's my great pleasure. So Lisa, perhaps we can start off by you telling us what your journey in cannabis has been like. What has been great and exciting for you? What are you concerned about? But most importantly, how has the journey been for you?
Sure. And I guess in some ways, I'm a relative newcomer to cannabis per se, but it seems to just fit my journey. I really got to know the food business when I was at the Wrigley company. And I was involved with helping Wrigley in the period of time when we went from being a gum company to being a global confections company. And so I reported to the chief innovation officer, but part of my mission was to help us rethink about all of our assets and our capabilities and think about expanding our presence in the market, which means, as someone once said, to go from being chewers to suckers. In other words, not just gum product. So in the course of time that I was there, we went from being like a $2 billion company to almost $6 billion. We launched like 220 new SKUs, which is shelf items. We redid packaging. We redid ingredients. We launched the first ever successful mint product. And we did it by thinking differently about how we actually did innovation. So instead of thinking about what's the next mint we can put on a shelf, we started thinking about problem detection. So what is the problem that we solved? And one of the reasons the product was so successful is it was a solution for a breath freshening. We had the shape that fit into the corner of your mouth. We had a container that you could open under the desk and dispense. And we even had tactile things that you could play with it in your mouth. Like when you're in that meeting and you're pretending you're paying attention, but you're really on brain vacation. Tactile sensations help you focus. So in the time I was at Wrigley, we really were in a very explosive time. We were looking at all sorts of new ingredients, all sorts of new ways of delivering value to the consumer through food. And we also did a lot of outside-in thinking in terms of the category. Previous to that, believe it or not, I cut my teeth at GE. So I understood B2B, and then all of a sudden I was in B2C. And then after I left Wrigley, I spent about 10 years being a chief growth officer for various companies, kind of on a contract or outside basis. So coming to cannabis, I had this wealth of different thinking from different industries, which is, I think, what cannabis demands. There is no one playbook. Mm-hmm. And CPG playbooks work a certain way, but they weren't designed not to instantly go national, right? And with cannabis, you can only go state line to state line. It has a lot to do with understanding your context, like everything from the contracts you negotiate, the space you occupy, the licenses. And I'd actually done some work with real estate at Wrigley. It absolutely depends on operating. And so I had also run operations at GE and understood a little bit of how people make things. And then on top of that, at this point, I've served on 9 different boards. And so my original path to Coda Signature was a call from a friend of mine who's in the investment community who said, we have a company that is looking to put in new board members to put some fiduciary governance into the company. But we'd like someone who understands innovation, who understands food and confections, and who also understands assembling highly effective teams to be operationally successful. So it kind of felt like it all led there. And I didn't initially join to become head of the company. I joined to support the head of the company. But then as circumstances turned out, I ended up becoming CEO, and I was really proud of it. So my journey is almost like the justification of a career that on the face of it looks erratic. In a traditional career, you either grow up in a company or you grow up in a single industry. I'd done everything from medical imaging equipment to selling a toy called the Huggy Buggy when I had my first startup, to working on gum and mints, but it all fits cannabis because cannabis is an industry, I think, that demands the best of your execution, but also the ability for you to use outside-in thinking in order to kind of solve the market equations as they hit you. Because there's so many things about cannabis that are non-traditional, just by the way the market is. And there's also so much unexplored territory. I mean, people talk about the depth of the ocean and like how much we haven't seen about our ocean, and they talk about how much we can explore on the moon. I feel the same way about cannabis because it's a product that we've only scratched the surface on in terms of both its applications and its potential. And so it's one of those things that a lot of diversified thinking and good execution has a lot of opportunity to flourish.
I feel the same way about it. I think it is a incredible opportunity to dive into a product and to help it grow and receive market acceptance in a way that it never has before. And of course, it's been around for centuries and centuries, but now we have an opportunity to shape it. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you did at Coda and what Coda's space was for those who don't know, and what you attempted to do with the company? Or
Yeah,
did do
Coda
with the company?
Signature is there's top brand in cannabis, a top 25 recognized brand. And the company has its legacy in chocolate with an amazing chocolatier founder who created a series of chocolate bars with cannabis in them, but they were founded on extraordinary flavors. So it really was about taking it beyond the waiting to get high, but having a complete experience from really the time you took the product off the shelf all the way through your experience. So I like to say what we wanted to do at Coda when I joined is we wanted to have at least 3 of your 5 senses be engaged. So it's not enough to just have the high of the cannabis, but what was the smell when you opened the package? What was the look, the tactile sensation, because there's high inclusion in the chocolate. So how did your mouth feel when you got coffee and donuts in there and you felt that cinnamon and then you felt that chocolate hit? So what we were really about doing is creating premium experiences. The company also had a line of gummies, but it was again on a kind of a different level, very non-traditional flavors. And then we had health and wellness products. And so what I was looking to do was a couple of things. One is to keep that premium experience, but also create spaces and places for people to start accessing cannabis. Because there is about a third of the country that's participating. There's about a third of the country that's going to take a long time, but there's about a third that's very canna curious. And so one of the things about especially edibles companies and wellness companies is you can be that on-ramp, but then you have to be very conscious about weaving yourself into the fabric of everyday life from 2 perspectives: the share of wallet, which is to give them incoming price points and then allow them to kind of increase their investment in other experiences. And then also the ability to consume both for different reasons in your life and with different levels of being overt or discreet. So we had premier truffles, which literally at Christmas, like I put out, our truffles on our Christmas platter, not infused, but they were so beautiful that I wanted them there, right?
Thank you for stipulating. That was good. Yes.
Right. But the point being is that they were visually exciting and interesting, and they were a phenomenal gift and a great way to enjoy an experience. And then you also had, we looked into doing like lozenges and things that I could, again, put in the corner of my cheek, and I could dispense, micro dosing, but with a very different intent and a different type of consumption, and then varying their price points. Because the other thing is that consumers, you always have to, in my view, if you're only doing market share, it's hand-to-hand combat. And it very quickly starts cratering into price or into just variables that aren't really consumer trigger points. But if you go a step back and you think of the share of mind and the share of wallet, that's where you can have some fun. And my biggest example of that out of the industry that I like to bring in is cell phone minutes. When in the 90s, none of us had a budget for cell phone minutes. None of us had a cell phone. But as cell phones started to come in, all of a sudden, it not only became something that people wanted to buy, it became a necessity. It is now part of everybody's budget. So if you're going to be thinking about your product, what's the share of wallet? And then the share of mind is where does it naturally kind of weave into your thought process or to your, your lifestyle? So that was some of the things that we tried to do, was to take a premium chocolate experience and a premium gummy and premium like bath bombs and salves and say, okay, what are the different on-ramps for people? And where do we fit into their lives in terms of reasons to consume? And by the way, fun is a great reason to consume.
Right.
But that was kind of the starting point. And then from there, you can build a portfolio of new innovations and new product forms and formats. And we had a lot of fun.
Lisa, you just showed in a couple of minutes how your experience has really could really transform the industry and certainly transform your company, because you brought your past insights and sensibilities to a new problem, and really the company and you really profited from doing that. So kudos to you. That is a really, really great explanation. So let's talk a little bit about power and how you view power and how you yourself have been powerful in your leadership positions. And when have you doubted your power?
Well, one thing about what I like to do is I like to stretch the rubber band, right? I like to think about where we can go differently. So whether it's with a legacy brand like a GE or Wrigley, I've tended to gravitate to or be put into jobs where it was about where can we expand or take this next? And in some cases, where can we break a little glass and think about it differently?
Mm-hmm.
Like at GE, we actually started businesses in GE Medical where we were the biggest digital imaging company in the world. But we decided that was the camera business. What could we do with the brain business? So we thought about e-commerce and all the different potentials that we had to take the information in the machine and the way that information could empower people to make better decisions without even the image. So that was some of the logic that I brought. But you also then have to bring a team of people along with you. So when you're talking about power, the first thing that you want to do when you lead an organization is you need to surround yourself with a lot of good skills. Because the one thing I know more than what I'm good at is I know a lot of things I'm not very good at. So you have to kind of identify what are the critical skills. And then you're asking them to come into an environment where something's not been done before, or you're asking them to do it differently or to rethink an established equation. And so you really have to think about how do you power up people and their enthusiasm? Because one of the things is it's great to think about a great idea, but you have to motivate people to participate in that great idea. And I like to say there has to be a whiff and a wit of gas.
I'm sorry, a what?
Whiffum
and
a wit of
Whiffum.
gas.
Okay.
Whiffum stands for what's in it for me.
Right.
And wit of gas is why do I give a shit?
You
may have to beat
I'm so
that.
glad I asked you to explain those. That's
But what it means is you have to think about everybody has a mom, a dad, a grandma, a spouse, right? So if you want people to come on board your strategy, there has to be some intrinsic value to them, both from a professional and a financial perspective, but there's just also the joy of doing it and the ability to come home and say, I did this and I made it worthwhile. I don't think any of us got over the gold star in third grade, right?
right.
So one of the things is you have to create a vision that's interesting and exciting enough for people that they want to do the non-traditional thing. They want to stretch the envelope with you. They see that they bring something to the table and that they'll get something beyond that for themselves. And I think that's critical is to remember everybody needs to grow in the experience. Sometimes what people do, I think, with highly innovative companies is they end up grinding people into it. Almost like, everybody's got to double down and get this thing done. And there's a lot of that. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of late nights and a lot of tough spots. But you kind of have to lay that groundwork to bring people in. Then the next thing you have to do is you have to create an environment where you do create some guardrails for them, so that they understand that there's something that kind of brings everyone together. We're heading for certain both financial goals as well as market goals, and even personal goals, so that they're not just being brought in and saying, hey, you're good at this, go do it, and if you don't, we'll get someone else or see ya. I mean, it has to have some sort of a focus to it. And, it's like people who went to launch on the moon. I mean, one of the things that always motivates me is Apollo 13, that movie.
Right.
First of all, there is more technology in my cell phone than they had in that entire NASA program.
Right.
And most of the people there were quite young. And they had to create that air filter by putting everything they had on the table and figuring out how to create an air filter to save people that were halfway to the moon. That's that type of thing where they were so motivated to get to the moon, and they were so motivated. One guy says this will not happen on my watch, that they're all in it together. And to me, that's a part of power that people don't understand. It's the power of mobilizing and aligning people, because they both have confidence that they bring something to the table, but they also have confidence that they're going to emerge from the other side,
Right.
being part of something, but also owning something they can take forward. And I think that's a piece that cannabis has the potential to do. But unfortunately, sometimes I think that cannabis gets a little ahead of itself with the investment and the investor numbers and, you know, the reporting and some of the pieces of the industry that by virtue have to come in a high growth industry, but you have to make sure that you're keeping an eye on both sides, which is the energy in the marketplace as well as the pace, and then the ability to return value.
Yeah, definitely. And so, Lisa, what are a couple of tips that you've used to empower other people in the organizations that you've led?
Well, I think one thing is you have to, again, focus on people as people. So, you know, first of all, they're people. They're not asset. They're not numbers. They're people. Second is, it's a bad day if you haven't learned in your job. And especially as a leader, if you spent the whole day feeling like you were teaching and you learned nothing, or you were talking and you didn't learn anything, those are usually the days where you're hyper focused on something and you're going to miss something. So I think really making sure that you stay humble and you stay open to what is it I don't know here. And another thing is not being afraid to reach from the outside in. So even in cannabis, as young as industry as it is, one of the things I would hear people say, well, this is cannabis. You know, when something didn't make sense to me or I asked a question, it was like, that was a rationale in and of itself. And I remember when I used to do a lot of work in Africa, and they try to explain to you why we needed to do something in a very convoluted way. And they said, well, Lisa, you know, this is Africa. And that was like, that explained it all. Well, that usually was my cue to say, wait a minute, can we go back and just go through why it's that way in cannabis, or, you know, why we defaulted to that position? So to remember to ask the questions and not just settle into the cannabis culture. The cannabis culture has a lot to offer, but it shouldn't be something that kind of locks us into the way things have always been done without maybe sometimes asking the questions. And we are inviting a lot of new talent in, and then also inviting a lot of outside in thinking. So we invited flavor houses that hadn't worked in cannabis before, packaging people who had done childproof packaging but may not have thought about cannabis. And we also started talking to nutrition and wellness companies about what their trends were and where they were looking. And in COVID, very seriously, what were some of the implications coming out of COVID? Immunity is a concern, lung health is a concern, brain fog is a concern. So also remembering to bring that outside in perspective. And if any one of your team, you know, kind of brings one of those things in, don't lock it down with this is cannabis, but see if you can't surround them with resources to kind of pursue that thought. And then I think the last one is also be clear on what success looks like.
Yeah.
So some of the targets for cannabis companies are really huge, and breaking that down so that you know when you're on track or you're not on track, and making sure everybody's literate in numbers. The other thing cannabis suffers from, very candidly, is financial literacy is not necessarily a given for everybody in cannabis. And so making sure people understand, you know, how the company works and how we measure companies. What is an operating margin? What is a sales margin? You know, why do we use those? And that they're not scary tools. They're actually informative ways that we can have discussions and make decisions. And so those would be mine, which is outside in, financial literacy, always be learning, and then really making sure that you focus on people.
Yeah, no, I think those are great. Just a couple other questions, Lisa, and thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it. What are the challenges that women in cannabis face? That's probably the topic for an entire show.
It is. And don't worry, I won't hold you because you don't have
You
to ask
just go for it.
I think women in general, I have never been, and I've said this quite a bit, I went to a women's college. I went to Smith College. And so I kind of have a formative experience in a very positive, proactive women's community. And I told someone once, and I really agree with this, I don't join any pression groups. I am not oppressed, repressed, depressed. Coming into it with that orientation, I think is something that sometimes can be a default to people. And so I think that in cannabis, the first thing women have to understand is we have an incredibly positive role to play. One of the things that really hasn't been unlocked in cannabis is the potential of cannabis itself. So when we start getting the type of research into terpenes and the different health applications, I mean, cannabis penetrates the blood-brain barrier better than anything, that's comparable. And the ability that that's going to have to unlock different types of ways of improving our lives and improving our families' lives. I know a lot of men that are very empathetic to this, but I do think that women can tend to be more inquisitive and tend to start with more empathetic orientation to things. And so there's a piece of what I'm watching women bring to the category, which is to ask questions about, and what else? Mm-hmm. It's not just a vice and a recreation, and what else? Or if it is recreation, how else can we use it? Microdosing beverages, for example. So you can have like a great long day out picnicking. So it's not like a quick gummy and then I'm half asleep. But also thinking about, what is the role of this, not just with anxiety and sleep, but what is the role of immunity? What is the role in lung health? So I've been participating with a group of women executives, and some of what we talk about is where should this category go from here? Because there are price constrictions and there are just reality constrictions on the recreational market, but there's so much potential in the actual product. I think the other thing for women in cannabis is we're just starting to more aggressively help each other. And part of that is investing in each other, because it has been an industry that has a very odd investment matrix. There's a lot of real estate, a lot of high net worth people, because traditional institutions don't have the ability to invest in cannabis yet because of our status. And so having women be more proactive and involved in investment circles and investing also helps, because they look at women leaders, but they also look at male leaders with a different lens. And so I think they add to the equation. I don't think it biases us just to women, but it also gives women an opportunity to have an investment voice, which I think is really healthy for companies. And I think the last thing is that cultivates a sense of mentorship, which is I see a lot more women reaching down and around to mentor other women. Madeline Albright said it best: there's a special place in hell for women who don't help each other. And I think cannabis has more than learned that lesson. I think it's a community where there's a lot more and more of women helping each other with skills, with investment, with context, and with networking. But obviously there's always room to improve that as much as far as you can.
Absolutely. So Lisa, what are your goals for the future, and how, if people are interested in this video, that were interested in talking to you, how can people reach out to you? Clearly they could do so on LinkedIn, but talk about your goals for the future and how people can connect with you if they're so inclined.
Well, my goal is always to build fast-growing companies that really make a mark in their industry, and I would love to stay in cannabis. So right now I'm sitting on a couple boards, and I'm a board advisor, but I'm always interested in participating in businesses. So I'd love to have, what my next CEO role is going to be is something I'm actively looking at, and also participating with actually mentoring smaller companies or women companies. So any of those will be of interest to me, being a board leader, a mentor advisor, or a leader of a company. And to reach out to me is through LinkedIn, definitely is a great way to get to me, or lisa.mcclung@lismoreintl.com is also my email address, which, by the way, is a family company, second generation. And it's also an investment vehicle that I'm using right now. So that also keeps my hand in terms of looking at investments.
Wonderful. Well, Lisa, I want to thank you very much for coming on to the show today. It was really helpful, informative, and you are a great interview partner. And thank you very much for your time. We will be posting this in our social media channels and making it available for people to see. My name is Steve Scheier. I am the author of Power Up. Lisa, I want to thank you. You gave a little inadvertent cue for the book earlier in your comments. I wrote this book with Michael Ashley just recently, and It's all for cannabis leaders to help them be more powerful and to create more powerful companies. Lisa, again, thank you very much for chatting with us, and take care.
My pleasure.